without wasting too much of time, and I know we are pretty going late, let's proceed on to technical session 12. And the thing would be the same, question and answers would be at the end of the session. And if anybody has questions in between, they can put it in the chat box. So, moving on to this session, the first presenter for the session is Sonia S. Pillai, who is an MPhil English scholar, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Ernakulam, Kerala. And the title of a paper is Exploring the Bond Between the Tribals and Their Environments in N. Raghavan's Kadamban and A. L. Vijay's Vanamagan. Yes, Sonia, over to you.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, 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 Sonia, you are.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Good evening to all. The topic of my presentation is exploring the bond between the tribals and their environments in N. Raghavan's Kadamban and A. L. Vijay's Vanamagan. Kadamban and Vanamagan are two Tamil movies released in the year 2017. Let me begin. Earlier documentaries and art films were the sources that depict the marginalized voices of the indigenous people because the dominant modes of narratives treated them as others. But today one can find an optimistic turn in the representation of the tribal cultures and their emotions in certain movies. Commercial movies were once relegated for the sole purpose of entertainment. Now, some of them seriously look up into the issues of their origins and try to make aware of their sufferings to the whole world. N. Raghavan's Kadamban and A. L. Vijay's Vanamagan are some of the recent examples which represent the lives of the tribal people and their innate connection with their environments. The objective of my paper is to explore the bond between the tribals and their environments, themes of exclusion and subjugation, and their efforts to protect their habitats in these movies. Now, about the movie Kadamban. Kadamban is a Tamil movie directed by N. Raghavan, which centers on the tribals of the Kadamban forest. Kadamban is also the name of the protagonist, enacted by the actor Arya in this movie. The tribal people were leading a harmonious life with their environment, but Mahindran brothers, the owners of a cement factory, come to know about the limestone accumulation in the forest and they try to evacuate them. However, Kadamban and his friends fight with them and regain their lost homeland. The next movie is Vanamagan. Vanamagan, Son of Nature, is a Tamil movie directed by A.L. Vijay, which stars Jainavi and Saish in the lead roles. The movie is based on the Andaman tribals and the hardships they have to face when their habitat is invaded for the execution of industrial projects. The story concentrates particularly on Jara, a tribal, and his life in city when he gets injured in an accident and suffers temporary memory loss and gets admitted to a city hospital. Kavya, the chairman of the project, understands the consequences arising out of the implementation of the industrial policies and she cancels the deals with the multinational company. Later, Kavya and Jara falls in love and she decides to live with Jara's tribal family. Now, moving on to the analysis. Both Kadamban and Vanamagan are commercial movies, but they provide critical insights to the society regarding the conservation of human resources and the protection of environment. Earth is being destroyed by the capitalist corporates, and their attempts to standardize the human lives leads to a catastrophic future. At first, the owner of the cement factory comes up with false promises like education, better lifestyle, money, etc. When they don't fall into their traps, they use violence in order to evacuate them from their native land, which they suppose to their mother. Towards the end of the movie, Karaman says, I quote, a human was born in a forest. It takes care of us just like a child. Thinking of destroying it means destroying your mother's womb. Doing that will not kill just your mother, even you will die. You cut trees for your greed, you kill animals for greed, and you destroy everything for a few rupees. There won't be land for the future generation. Unquote. In the postmodern world, men use the latest ammunition and technologies in combats and war. But the tribals use eco-friendly amenities like dry coconuts, bamboo stick, huge rocks when they engage in fights. Though globalization and other capitalist endeavors conquer the world, the tribal culture stands independent despite the spreading of selfish interests in the society. Tribals are the natives of the forest, but the so-called civilized people oppress them. The imperialist agenda of exploitation still continues after the process of decolonization, especially in the case of marginalized sections of the society. And as Pramod K. Nair, in his critical work Postcolonial Literature and Introduction, published in the year 2008, asserts, I quote, if the native was a subaltern during the colonial rule, Post-colonialism created its own subalterns. Women, lower caste and classes, ethnic minorities rapidly became the others within the post-colonial nation state. The new elite was as oppressive as the colonial master. Democratic approaches failed, and economic and social emancipation slipped across the horizon as millions of post-colonials saw themselves colonized by the new powers. Unquote. Fenomenon also refers to the grave issues of illegal animal trading, and also the killing of tigers and elephants for their skins, nails, ivory, etc. During the colonial times itself, indigenous people and the environments are looted for raw materials and resources for industries. When the tribals resist their attempts and try to protect nature, they are labeled as undeveloped or uncivilized beings. As Kadamil says, I quote, "If you think we are wild because we saved the forest, then we are wild." Unquote. In the opening scene of Vanamagan, Kavya is introduced as an arrogant and impatient girl who wants to get things done immediately without any shortcomings. She can't forgive her servants if she finds even a drop of tea outside the teacup, and she throws it without any hesitation. She doesn't know the feeling of hunger, as she can have food at the moment she wants to. Her servants serve her different varieties of dishes like American, Italian, French, etc. on a daily basis as her taste varies depending on the mood. Each day she selects a particular dish from those options and the rest of them will be dumped. Kavya's behavior is a foil to the tribal people since they depend on nature only for their needs, not for satisfying their greed. Tribal people's life is an example for the effective management and conservation of the natural resources available to them. They take what they need and save the rest for the future generation, unlike the capitalist mode of consumerism. Nature is a guide or mentor which teaches human beings to love each other, unlike the materialist world, as in the case of Kavya. She loses her parents during her childhood, and she was brought up by Rajshekhar, her father's greedy friend. Kavya measures everything with money, and she thinks that money is the source of one's happiness. Hence, when one of her employees asks her to grant leave for his daughter's wedding, she denies permission and gives 5 lakh rupees for the marriage ceremony. Since she was thrown under the shade of a materialistic world, she couldn't understand the meaning of love and relationships. It is through Jara that she comes to know about the emotions and feelings of others, and it's possible only through maintaining an intimate bond with nature. As William Wordsworth speaks about nature in his poem The Table Stone, published in the year 1798, I quote, "Come forth into the light of things, let nature be your teacher. She has a word of ready wealth, our minds and hearts to bless, spontaneous wisdom breathed by health, truth breathed by cheerfulness. One impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of a man, of more evil and of good than all the sages can." Unquote. At first, Kavya tries to converse with Jara using the modes of animal training, and also she gives him the name Vasi, which is a short form for Kattavasi. Kattavasi means one who lives in the forest. She takes him to her office and pays salary for his work. But doesn't understand the application of money because in his community, everyone shares resources equally among them, and there are no private properties as all of them have equal rights of their homeland. Later, Kavya removes her misconceptions regarding the tribal culture and helps in searching his tribe. Technology and communication media are for the simplification of human lives, since it reduces the distance and other hardships among the human beings. But when it's been overused, it mechanizes the lives of individuals. When Kavya points about the AC in Jara's room, he opens a window and feels the cool breeze, and later Kavya too imitates Jara's steps and understands the touch and smell of the natural world. Jara meets an employee in Kavya's office who often quarrels with his wife over the phone. Jara is not familiar with mobile phone or any other ultra-modern gadgets, and slowly he gets to know about the mechanized urban life. He realizes how the modern accessories affect the emotional side of relationships. When Jara sees the wife of the employee in his room, he immediately holds her on his shoulders and runs to Kavya's office. And traffic police and others follows him, but later they could understand Jara's intention that he wants to reunite the lady with her employee husband in Kavya's office. Through this act, Jara shows how technology masters human affection and thereby creates a rift in the city life. Jara suffers from temporary memory loss when he is hit by Kavya's car. But when he sees the forest, his brain triggers his past memories because he is so connected to his natural environment that the moment he sees his homeland, he returns to his tribal culture. Tribals worship the gods of nature, and their rituals, customs, and festivals are closely related to the natural environment. Jara hurts a tiger while he tries to save a child from its attack, but he stitches the tiger's wound and brings back to life. Later, the same tiger saves Jara's life from the city dwellers. Similarly, in Kadamban, the villagers save the life of a wounded elephant which in turn returns the help during an adversary situation. Thus, one can find an intimate bond between the tribals and the flora and other natural forms. Tribal dialects are entirely different from urban dialects, but they can easily communicate with the birds and animals in the jungle. In Kadamban, when the tribals see flocks of birds screaming and flying from their nest, they find it as an admonition that an ecological cataclysm is on the horizon. When the planet is in distress, the first one who senses it will certainly be the creatures which are close to nature. After that incident, the tribal people is forced to run away from their native land. There's a scene in the movie in which Jara crushes Walt to enter Kavya's house instead of passing through those. Though it's a comical representation, as one usually finds in the commercial movies, the episode of Breaking the Wall implies a message that human world shouldn't be separated from the nature by constructing barriers, as all living beings are a part of nature. Jara's wall-breaking scene reminds lines in the poem Melting Wall by Robert Frost, published in the 1940, I quote, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down," unquote. Nature is not interested in making borders, and it attempts to create a union among all the organisms, including humans in this universe. Jara is bonded with the forest and its inmates, and when he goes in search of his tribal people, an eagle becomes a compass to guide him. The same eagle destroys a surveillance camera when enemies try to decode Jara's journey. Tribals give warning to the capitalist oriented society about the upcoming environmental disasters and the extinction of species. The process of globalization places the whole world under an umbrella, but when the world becomes competitive in nature, they forget about the preservation of biodiversity and its repercussions will certainly be unaffordable for the planet. As Kalamin says, I quote, "Our fathers didn't see those animals which our ancestors saw. What animals our fathers saw, we haven't seen them. The animals that we are seeing today, maybe our future generation will not see it." Unquote. The world revolves around consumer culture and consumerism devoid of ethics and brotherhood by strictly following utilitarian policies. To conclude, both Kadamat and Manamagan point out that the tribal people are the original inhabitants of the forest, but they are the ones who are always destined to face displacement or remain homeless due to the capitalist agenda of the multi-corporate agencies along with the globalization. Also, they portray the usage of sign language in a world marked by materialism and how their lives and memories are intrinsically connected with nature. Though commercial elements are added to the content of the movies, the message which conveys to the audience is relevant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sonia ma'am. Next presenter for the session is Ms. Deepa George, who is the former guest lecturer, St. Thomas College, Thrissur, Kerala. The title of her paper is Culturally Responsive Education, an Antidote to the Educational Challenges of Indigenous Students. Over to you, Deepa ma'am.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I wish to thank the organizers of this international webinar for giving me this platform to present the paper. Moving on to my topic, the paper is titled Culturally Responsive Education, an Antidote to the Educational Challenges of Indigenous Students. In this title, we will come across three key terms: culturally responsive education, antidote, and educational challenges of Indigenous students. So we can begin discussing the educational challenges of Indigenous students. Indigenous knowledge can be described as wisdom needed to survive in an environment. It is based on centuries of experience and close observation of one's surroundings, including plants, animals, and weather. Indigenous pedagogy is based on centuries of experience, and its aim is to raise children to function effectively in a close knit community. Central to the transmission of this wisdom is language, which through oratory, storytelling, advice, songs, and conversations shows youth the way to live well. Assimilationist colonial approaches to schooling devalued indigenous knowledge and indigenous pedagogy and broke the pattern of intergenerational transmission of culture. Educational system all over the world always proved to be incompetent in identifying the true intellectual spirit of indigenous people, but it never missed any chance to attribute this incompetency on the indigenous students and thereby making them diffident to come forward to the so-called mainstream sophisticated student community. Education provides knowledge, confidence, ability to encounter problems, and to enjoy socio-economic and political opportunities. Hence, exploitation of tribal people can be eliminated only through education. But the widespread failure of indigenous students is seen in high dropout rates. There are two aspects for this problem. The background of the tribal students is entirely different from that of non-tribal teachers and schoolmates. Educators who do not recognize and value the cultural background of indigenous students can instill self-doubt, and it may lead these students to underestimate their experiences, capacities, and talents. The damage done by schooling that ignores indigenous knowledge is pointed out in the United Nations General Assembly's adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007. According to this declaration, indigenous people have the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems, and literatures, and to designate and retain their own names for communities, places, and persons. It also states indigenous people have the right to establish and control their educational systems and institutions, providing education in their own languages in a manner appropriate to their cultural methods of teaching and learning. Culturally responsive education is put forward as an antidote to the myriad social and educational challenges faced by the indigenous students. Culturally responsive education is having its foundation in constructivist learning theory that that situates all learning in a cultural milieu and is built around how human beings learn by connecting and integrating new knowledge into what students have previously learned outside the school. When the culture and often even the language of the school is too different from the home cultures of indigenous students, they face severe identity issues and learning difficulties. Culturally education is designed to decrease that gap and to increase the chance for educational success for indigenous students. The traditional approach to teaching, the transmission model, which focuses more on lecture and textbooks, promotes neither the interaction between prior and new knowledge nor the conversation that is necessary for internalization and deep understanding. The information acquired from traditional teaching, if acquired at all, is usually not well integrated with other knowledge held by the students. Thus, new knowledge is often only brought forth for school like activities such as exams, and it is totally ignored at all other practical times. Culturally responsive education is an approach to teaching and learning that facilitates critical consciousness, engenders respect for diversity, and acknowledges the importance of relationship while honoring, building on, and drawing from the culture, knowledge, and language of students, teachers, and community. Actions are urgently required to enhance the intergenerational transmission of local and indigenous knowledge. Many recent publications discussing culturally responsive education address a growing concern over the increasingly apparent cultural disconnection between indigenous students and mainstream curriculum and teachers. Culturally responsive education can have a healing impact on indigenous communities through addressing issues particular to students and their families and communities. In indigenous contexts, this includes working towards cultural revitalization, honoring a rich heritage, and attending to a host of other social and economic issues that arose primarily from hegemonic colonial approaches to education. The challenge is to move indigenous knowledge system and worldviews from the margin of formal schooling to the center, and to consider how indigenous knowledge systems can inform and be informed by alternative ways of seeing the world. It should be a give and take policy. This means that a focus on indigenous knowledge system places values and importance on knowledge developed and distributed within and by local cultures and communities. Over the years, the push for indigenous self-determination and sovereignty has intensified, culminating in the passage of the 2007 UN Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous People, which recognizes that one-size-fits-all educational systems have failed indigenous students in regards to both respecting their human rights and providing academic success. Indigenous people are also in danger of losing their cultural heritage and distinct identity. Education should raise awareness of the positive value of cultural and linguistic diversity And to this end, curriculum should be reformed to promote a realistic and positive inclusion of the minority history, culture, language, and identity. I wish to conclude my words with a quote of Swami Vivekananda. If a child cannot reach education, the education must reach the child. And this seems to very well reflect the essence of culturally responsive education. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, this was really wonderful. And thank you so much. Moving on to the
Thank you.
third presentation of the day would be Mr. Digambar Madhukar Rao Date, who is the research scholar, junior lecturer at Parth Saniki Junior College, Kharpuri Road, Jalna, Maharashtra. The title Okay, the title of his paper is Reflection of Nepalese Ethnic Minorities in Thapas, the Tutor of History. Over to you, Mr. Digambar.
Thank you, ma'am. Hello.
Yes, yes, Mr. Digambar.
Am
You
I
may start.
audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes, you absolutely audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
My research paper title is Reflection of Nepalese Ethnic Minorities in Thapas, the Tutor of History. Since Nepali literature in English is rarely studied, the aim of my research paper is to discuss, analyze, and interpret the portrayal of Nepali society and ethnic minorities depicted in Manjushree Thapa's first novel, The Tutor of History. The novel is published in 2001. As a woman novelist from Nepal, Thapa has meticulously portrayed the various aspects of social life in this Himalayan state. The period fictionalized in the Tutor of History since the decade of second democratic moment in Nepal, that is 1990 to 2000. Political instability in Nepal before the upcoming parliamentary elections, party politics, political rivalries, corruption in various government departments is highlighted in the novel as the protagonist, Rushi Parzuli, is seen reading several news items about it. Thapa has brilliantly revealed the problems of some ethnic minority groups in Nepal, such as Gurung, Tamang, Magar, Rai, and Limbu, who firmly believe that originally they are indigenous people, firmly believe that originally they are Buddhists and their ancestors were the indigenous people to their motherland, Nepal. The sentiment against Hindu subjugation of a minority religion, which was deeply rooted in these ethnic minority groups of Nepal, is realistically reflected in the novel. Realistic description about the suppression of cultural, social, and political freedom of the ethnic minority groups like Magar, Gurung, and other indigenous people is the peculiarity of the Tutor of History. Simultaneously, the novel reflects the cultural and religious complexities of Nepal, which was dominated by the 250 years old Hindu monarch till 2008. Thapa's first novel, The Tutor of History, was published in 2001. It was the first major novel in English image from Nepal. The novel is set in the roadside town of Khairanitar in Tanaun districts of West Nepal against the backdrop of ongoing parliamentary elections. Though major part of the novel deals with the election campaigns and politics of Nepal, simultaneously the four separate lives are seen closely intertwined together as the narration proceeds. Rushi Parzuli, a disillusioned communist who gives private tuitions in history, Giridhar Adhikari, an alcoholic who is chairman of the People's Party District Committee, Om Gurung, a large-hearted former British Gorkha, and the reclusive young widow Binita Dahal. The Tutor of History is divided into 15 chapters and 57 small sections. The invaluable economic and social significance of Om Gurung's contribution to his educationally backward society through his English medium boarding school is precisely pointed out in the tutor of history as Thapa portrays the social condition of Pairinitar before the establishment of the Pure Heart boarding school. The ongoing cultural revolution of Nepal and Maoist people's war against the bourgeois society is effectively fictionalized in the novel through the character of Harsha's Maoist cousin, who smirks unpleasantly as he explains about the ongoing Maoist revolution to Harsha. That's why we fighting, my brother, for a Maoist republic. We live in the turbulent transition time from a feudal to capitalist system. But capitalism creates a bourgeois society that won't give us what we deserve. Parliamentary democracy is just a pawn of the rich. That's why we workers and peasants must reject reform efforts, efforts and fight for true revolution. We must claim what is rightful ours: education, jobs, electricity, roads, a wholesale landslide, Gelstorm kind of cultural revolution. He tugged at his beard in excitement. Look, brother, the Maoist People's War is the best option for the heartbroken. You think you are the only sad Nepali? Is any of us free from multinational imperialist broker capitalist exploitation of our parliamentary democracy? You must awaken, brother, and fight. This further indicates that some marginalized people from lower sections of the Nepali society were not satisfied with the ongoing parliamentary system. A huge section of the society was suspicious about the usefulness of upcoming parliamentary democracy in a changing society which was mostly ruled by its Hindu monarchy. Commenting about the tutor of history, Sally Acharya correctly observes in her review, it adds to believability that Thapa had the courage to make the novel as timely as possible. And that's what makes it so unsettling to read that this particular date in time. Maoists appear in Thapa's novel as shadowy figures in the background, and ultimately a bomb goes off, but the characters aren't yet afraid that running for office will mean a knock on the door and a violent death. Dominance of the men in active politics of Nepal is effectively fictionalized in the novel through the characters of Giridhar Adhikari and actor-turned-politician named Raj Dahal. As Kalpana rightly sums up, Thapa's novel, The Tutor of History, too displays how the active political field is the foray of the male, while Binita is left to hold the tea shop and be a passive participant in whole scene, even though it is her brother-in-law who is part of that electoral campaign. Since most of the part of Tutor of History is devoted to the Nepalese politics and political transformation of the Himalayan nation, it also offers the description of different political ideologies of several political parties. Among them, some are democratic and some are monarchist. Nepali Congress Party, Nepal Communist Party, United Marxist Leninists, Rashtriya Prajatantra Party, and Janmukti Party. These are the four major political parties fictionalized in the novel. Though these parties are fictional, but it represents major political trends, views, and ideologies for the empowerment of Nepal, which were really existed in the contemporary Nepalese politics. In the novel, Thapa satirically depicts the political scenario of contemporary Nepal and some of the major political ideologies which are completely opposite to each other, as he portrays about the public meetings and rallies organized by different political parties during their campaigning for the ongoing parliamentary elections. As the candidate of Janmukti Party is also seen addressing a mass rally in his speech, the regional imbalance between hill area and Tarai plains of Nepal, social injustice and overall dominance of Kshatriya caste in Nepalese society, suppression of the indigenous people from lower castes like Sherpa, Tamang, Magar, Gurung, Rai, and Limbu is unfolded in it. The speech delivered by the candidate further displays the discontent among these sections of the society over Nepal's long-lasting traditional identity as the Hindu kingdom. by its constitution overlooking the Buddhist practices in Nepal. This is how the speaker, the candidate, appeals his followers for the restoration of Nepal's glorious past, which reaffirms the social hierarchies in dynamic Nepal. This is what he says in public rally, the candidate. Dear respected Janmukti Party officials and members, brothers and sisters of all ethnic groups and all fellow countrymen, Namaste. Our country is home to over 60 caste and ethnic groups and 70 languages, and yet, a decade after democracy, only few powerful castes rule as they did in former days. In every political party, in every organization, in every government office, in all sectors of society, Chetri Bahun caste hold power while the ethnic Sherpa, Tamang, Magar, Gurung, Rai, Limbu people remain suppressed in the hills and other ethnic groups remain oppressed in southern Tarai plains. Our ethnic cultures are looked down on. Our languages are banned from offices. Our numbers are underrepresented in national census counts. With our constitution defining Nepal as a Hindu kingdom, Buddhists and other religious minorities remain oppressed by the Hindu hegemony. But anytime we address these issues, Chetri Bahuns accuse us of trying to fragment the nation. They say that we want to go back to the age of 24 kingdoms. We want post-ethnic strife. In fact, we are only fighting for an end to discrimination against us and against the occupational caste Dalit populations, great injustice they face. We have all lost our identities. In fact, how proud our peoples were before Chetri Bahun caste domination. Originally, we were egalitarian, peaceable folks. We had no hierarchies. There were no caste. Our women weren't oppressed by men. Really, of course, all this requires more research. Historians must verify. But basically, things were more idle than now. We must restore our glorious past. But we must go backwards. You know what I mean. Above all, we must assert our rights only when our people receive the respect they deserve. Will Nepal be truly democratic? Vote for the Janmukti House. This is what the Janmukti candidate is appealing to his voters in the novel. This is how till 2008, constitutionally, Nepal was a unique Hindu state in the world. So Nepal was being treated as a Hindu state by international community. Yet it also has a Buddhist heritage in its culture. Since the founder of Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, was born in Lumbini in the Rupandi district of western Nepal in 623 BC. For this reason, amalgamation of Hinduism and Buddhism has become the peculiarity of Nepalese. Thus, this gradual, long-lasting amalgamation of Buddhist and Hindu practices has become the issue of a great concern in the society of Nepal, because at some extent it has perpetuated some confusion about the purity of their own religions among the masses. In the tutor of history, while portraying dynamic Nepalese society, Thapa attentively includes the very fabric of the society. As she writes, this year there was some confusion in the Gurung and Magar families of the town about whether or not to celebrate Dashan and Tihar. In his rousing speeches, the candidate of the ethnic rights Janmukti Party had stirred much sentiment against Hindu subjugation of minority religions. Many Gurung and Magar families felt it was time to return to their roots. We are Buddhist in origin, said some, citing as proof the way they turned to Buddhist for death. That's what historians say. Nowadays, we were originally from Tibet and Buddhist in faith. Now we are animists, said others. Our people are indigenous to this land. We were Bonpo long before we became Buddhists. We worship nature. We pray to trees, rivers, and rocks. It isn't a question of what we are, but a matter of what we aren't, said those who felt it more urgent to oppose the Hindu hegemony than to bicker about heroic origins. It's clear that we aren't original Hindu, so we must boycott Darshan Tihar. So this is how some ethnic minorities of Nepal are always considering Darshan and Tihar as a original Hindu festivals, and in this sense, they always try to boycott it. This is realistically reflected in this novel. This is how, in the Tutor of History, Thapa has successfully portrayed socio-political and cultural realities of changing Nepal. Sally Acharya, a journalist from Kathmandu, rightly pointed out about the novel. It adds to believability that Thapa had the courage to make the novel as timely as possible. She further observed the setting of the Tutor of History has already passed into history. Yet, it remains a perspective and memorable portrayal of a more or less contemporary Nepal, colored by the permanent unrest of those who moved unseen through the land. And to conclude, commenting on the Tutor of History, South Asia Book Blog rightly sums up the essence of Thapa's first novel. This isn't fiction, it's a real and should be realized by all who perpetuate an image of Nepal as a peaceful, friendly Himalayan Shangri-La, astonishingly common steel, which further confirms, yes, Thapa's novel could be considered social realism, but it is deeper and smarter than that, playing with satire throughout. So this is how the Tutor of History can be considered as the real portrayal of the Nepali social realities, and in that there is one peculiarity regarding the narrative of the novel that I can say that it genuinely reflects some mentalities towards the Hindu subjugation and Hindu culture over the uh, original Buddhist culture and original the indigenous people like Gurung, Tamang, and all the ethnic minorities of Nepal. So I'll I would like to stop here. That's all about my presentation. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Digambar. I would, give a feedback on all the presentations at the end of the session. First, let's complete the presentations because I know there are a lot of butterflies going on and we are already running late. So the next presenter is Dr. S. Ramya
It's
Niranjani,
okay, ma'am.
Assistant Professor of English, Sri Sarada College for Women, Salem, and S. Magisha Varthini, PhD scholar, Sri Sarada College for Women. So the title of their paper is Refugee Integration in Elizabeth Strout's The Burgess Boys. So over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. And this is S. Magishavartini, research scholar in English, and I'm going to present my paper on refugee integration in Elizabeth Strout's The Burgess Boys. And this paper focuses on the obstacles faced by Somalis in their path of integrating in America, as portrayed in the novel The Burgess Boys by Elizabeth Strout. First, let me give you the Oxford Learners Dictionary's definition for the term refugee. It defines refugee as a person who has been forced to leave their country or home because there is a war or for political, religious, or social reasons. Somalia is the easternmost country of Africa. The civil war in Somalia has paved way for millions of Somali refugees in various parts of the world, such as Arabian Peninsula, North America, Southern Africa, Australia, and Europe. The United Nations has estimated that in 2015, approximately 2 million Somalis were living away from their country. The refugees who were forced to leave their country and settle in a host country face various issues. The integration of refugees in a host country is based on the ability of the refugees to adapt to the host society and the readiness of the host community to accept the refugees. The refugees move to various places in the hope of fulfilling their basic needs. However, the situation of refugees must be analyzed in the respective host society for the mental and physical well-being of the refugees. The Pulitzer Prize winner Elizabeth Strout, who is an American novelist, has explored the process of refugee integration in her novel The Burgess Boys. Strout has authored 7 novels and is known for her descriptive characterization. The Burgess Boys was published in 2013 and is a national bestseller. The setting of the novel includes a fictional place in America, namely Shirley Falls, Maine, where crowds of Somali refugees move and struggle to be a part of the American community. The Somalis face various difficulties such as cultural difference, language barriers, lack of job opportunities, dilemma whether to return to their homeland or to settle in the host country, homesickness, fear of authorities, mental health problems, etc. Strout has successfully highlighted these issues in her novel as a backdrop to the main plot. The main plot revolves around the brothers, Jim and Bob, who are living in New York and is forced to visit their native Maine to help their sister Susan and her son Zach, who are in a desperate situation. At the backdrop, crowds of Somali refugees are living in Maine. While some Native Americans accept them as a part of their country, some of them intensely dislike their presence. These dual opinions keep the refugees in a state of confusion. The novel also gives instances about Somali refugee camps in Kenya. Jim's wife Helen reads an article about it and came to know that some of the Somalis who are living in Maine first lived in dreadful conditions in those camps. From the article, Helen, I quote, read how the women, in order to gather firewood, had to wander away from the camp where bandits might rape them. Some of these women had been raped several times. Many of their children died of starvation right in their arms. The children who lived did not go to school. There were no schools. I unquote. The men can have up to 4 wives and they struggle to keep their family alive with the minimum quantity of rice and cooking oil which the authorities provide them every 6 weeks. In the host country, the refugees face financial issues and it becomes difficult for them even to meet the medical expenses. Susan had been an optometrist for years and a few Somalis visited her for treatment. They tried to bargain the treatment fee, which seems shocking to Susan, as no Native Americans do that. As she says, they might try and negotiate the price, which blew me away the first time it happened. Then I heard that's what they do, barter. There are some natives who try to gain fame by helping these Somalis and then boasting of it. Susan mentions Carol Prescott and her daughter in law, who always take the Somali women for shopping and buy them things like washing machines, refrigerators, or a set of pots and pans. Though they help these refugees, their real intention is to blow their own trumpet. Susan is not interested in it and she puts forward, I quote, I don't feel like dragging these women around buying them things and then telling everyone I did. I unquote. The refugees are afraid to lodge a complaint against the natives even if they themselves are the victims. They strongly believe that the natives support only the natives and so they are distrustful of authorities. Once, when Bob was driving the car, unmindfully he was about to run the car over a Somali woman named Ayana. There is another Somali woman with her and a clerk from a nearby shop who is also a Somali woman. Since it is an accident, Bob insisted that it should be reported to the police. But the Somali women strongly neglected the idea of going to the police. As the clerk says, why the police? They are your friends. In this case, though there is no mistake on the part of the Somali women, they hesitate to go to the police. Somalis are prone to various health and mental problems in the host country. Pam Carlson, ex-wife of Bob, had worked as a research assistant to a parasitologist. She has a concern for these Somalis and she knows that they are prone to a group of infections termed schistosomiasis, which is considered as the second most socio-economically devastating parasitic disease by the World Health Organization. It is due to the fact that the refugees who moved from the southern regions of Somalia contain Schistosoma hematobium X in their urine. These Somalis also have a high risk of malaria. Palm also learns that a darker skinned group named Somali Bantu, who moved to Maine 2 centuries ago as slaves from Tanzania and Mozambique, showed higher rate of schistosomiasis. According to the International Organization for Migration, there are also serious mental health problems to them, such as trauma and depression. Some superstitions of the Somali Bantu prevent them from getting proper treatment for the diseases. It includes burning the skin of affected areas or pulling out the baby teeth of a child with diarrhea as treatments. The Somali refugees struggle to fulfill their day-to-day needs as they lack in English communication. Due to this, they are unable to fill the forms even for their basic needs such as housing and public assistance. They even struggle to tell the birth dates of their children. For instance, they would say that their child was born in the season of the sun. It ends up in entering wrong details in the form. This language issue is also a problem for native social workers who struggle to learn the words of Somali. It is to be noted that while the younger generation has the ability to easily mingle in the host community, the older generation has much difficulty in adapting themselves in the host community. Abdikarim Ahmed, who had moved to Shirley Falls a year ago, found that his wife Asha had took their children and moved to Minneapolis as she no longer wanted to live with Abdikarim. He blames America for teaching such independence to Asha. Abdikarim owns a cafe where usually Somali men gather and mostly discuss on their community. Abdikarim could not easily adapt in a new environment, mainly because of his inability to speak English, while his daughter and his grandchildren could easily mingle in the host country. His daughter, who is living in Nashville, called him and talked of her sons playing saucer, how they spoke almost flawless English. To conclude, through some fragmented facts and incidents, Strout has beautifully pictured the life of refugees in a host country. Despite many struggles, most of the refugees adapt themselves to the new environment, which paves way for successful refugee integration. Through this novel, The Burgess Boys, Strout creates a multifaceted perception of Somali refugees among the readers. Thank you all.
Thank you, Magisha. Next presenter of the day is Satyabrata Roy, who's the research scholar, Department of Geography, Raiganj University, West Bengal. The topic is the unplanned growth of the population has a human and natural effect on maintaining the ecological balance. Over to you,
Yes,
Satyabrata.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Now I am
Evening.
going to deliver a presentation on the topic the unplanned growth of the population has a human and natural effect on maintaining the ecological balance. The thin layer of living things that surrounds Earth is called the biosphere. In order to preserve the biodiversity in this ecosystem, each life put more emphasis on the minimum demand food through the struggle for its own mutual existence. In this fauna, plant, animal, insect, etc. reaches the stage of maintaining the ecological balance by birth, death, and development by living in their specific geographical area. From sunlight, the main source of energy on Earth, to the combination of producer and eater, and in uninterrupted and one-way flow of energy can be observed. The ecological balance is disturbed as the organic and inorganic elements of the environment are constantly changing through the waste of human resources for the rapid growth of the population. through the struggle for a better climate around the world. People and deforesting the world most populous countries in the name of social development, cultural resistance and settlement. This destroys the ecological balance that exists in the natural environment of deforestation. On the other hand, with the normal life of the people, the adverse effects on the health, economy, and social life are observed. In addition, the positive effect of the plant and animal on the structure, diet, and physiological development of every living thing in the environment have a negative effect. Thus, people make unplanned use of the elements of the natural nature of for their livelihood and economic development, due to which the rate of human population is high. Extreme levels of population such as carbon dioxide, nitrogen, CFC, nitrogen oxide, and water vapor in the atmosphere have led to global warming and climate changes. Biodiversity and ecological balance of the polar region are disturbed due to increase in global warming. Ecological equilibrium require an idea of what kind of environment is needed or various aspects of it. By definition, ecosystems are complex processes involved in the conservation of biodiversity by which the environment reaches its final stage in terms of the interrelation world. That is, it is a complex repetitive process by which the entire organism completes its life cycle in stage from creation to death and return to nature through the disintegration at the last stage. But now mankind, being the most intelligent in nature, destroy the natural environment to be financially and socially self-sufficient. Damage to the natural resources disrupt the ecological balance. Conclusion: in addition to the development of the present social system, people used to positive benefit of the financially of their cultural by taking advantage of the opportunities provided by nature, and through which they constantly implement new plan for the betterment of the in community centered society. It can be said that the economic development that is possible by maintaining the ecological balance of the environment enhance the ability of human beings to use resources or waste through hard work, intelligence, technology, and proper planning. Therefore, it can be said that by saving resources, the supply of these of things is less than what is needed, and by saving some of it for the future, it is possible to protect the rare things from the extinctions of natural resources environment, so that future unplanned people are not taken away from the resources for any unplanned work of the present, and with it the right balance of the environment is maintained. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Satyabrata. So the last session for the day, moving on to Mukta Satisha, Assistant Professor, Department of Water and Health, Faculty of Sciences, Academy of Higher Education and Research, Mysore. Her topic is Linguistic Analysis on Santhali Language. Over to you, Mukta.
Yeah. Okay. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you so
Go ahead.
much.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I share a present? Can I share the slides? Can I share the slides?
You may.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Just a moment. Okay, now basically, as ma'am introduced me, I am Mukta Satisha, Assistant Professor, JSS AHER, Faculty of Life Sciences, Mysuru. And my topic for the oral presentation for this conference on Indigenous Studies is Linguistic Analysis of Santali Language. And I thank ma'am for giving me this opportunity to make a presentation in this webinar, in this international webinar. Now, my main abstract of this paper is an attempt to highlight the minority status of the Santali language, even though it was the first Indian tribal language to get Wikipedia edition in its own script. A lot still needs to be done till the Santali language is treated on par with the other scheduled Indian languages like Bengali, Oriya, Hindi, etc. Now, it's the most popular and widely spoken Austro-Asiatic language of Jharkhand, and it is also spoken in West Bengal and Odisha. The script being used for present-day Santali language is Old Chiki, and the ancient folk literature has also been compiled in this script. Now, the origin of the name Santali has been given different interpretations. According to W.B. Oldham, the word Santal is a synonym for similarity. In reality, the word Santal has originated from Sant or Sadhu, which means a monk. The states and countries where Santali is spoken are Jharkhand, Bihar, West Bengal, Odisha, MP, and Assam, and it's also spoken in the neighboring countries of Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh in the Indian subcontinent. It is spoken by nearly 1 crore people, and this language was included in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution on 20th December 2003. The script is Old Chiki. It was created by Pandit Raghunath Murmu, and he is also known as the father of the Santali language. It uses 30 letters and includes 6 basic and 3 additional vowels. Now, this is how the script looks like. It's basically, so these are the words, what they mean in English, and these are the words, how they look like in this in Old Chiki script. Let's come to some grammatical rules of Santali language. There is no definite place for words in the sentences. The meaning remains the same even though the words are interchanged. Like, for example, Ram Dake Jama also means Ram will have his food now, and Jome Ram Daka also means Ram will have his food now. So the rearrangement of words, even though the words are rearranged, the sentence has the same meaning. Rule 2, the same verb is used for male and female living and non-living objects. For example, here as can be seen in this table, Lata, Suraj, and Gadi, which Lata is female, Suraj is male, Gadi is a non-living object. For that, there is no specific gender in Santali language. Then let us, next rule is the place, state, shapes, type, etc. is indicated through the verb, and the verb katna in Hindi, which means to cut in English, has the following applications. Santali language contains glottal stop in pronunciation of its words. That is, yat da pani, it means water. Glottal stop, those who are familiar with linguistics will know that it is stop sound made by rapidly closing the vocal cords, as in metal, Latin, bot, cut, etc. There are several nouns related to nature in the Santali language, and it is also known as a naturalistic language because being an indigenous language, obviously the vocabulary contains lots of words related to nature. Yes, words related to diseases. This is just one of the tables which I have included for this presentation. Inclusion of Santali in the Indian Constitution. The 92nd Amendment of the Constitution of India, officially known as the Constitution Act 2003, amended the 8th schedule to the Constitution so as to include Bodo, Dogri, and Santali languages, thereby raising the total number of languages listed in the schedule to 22. Old Chiki was approved in 1979, and textbooks have been drafted accordingly. Basically, the main reason for including this Old Chiki script was that main intention was to help educating Santali children with the help of their mother tongue at the primary stage by the government of West Bengal. And now
universities in West Bengal, like University of Burdwan, Vidyasagar University, Rabindra Bharati University, and other universities have started including certificate and degree courses in Santali. So, despite all these progress which has been made, the never-ending struggle for existence of the Santali language is far from over. Main problem is the lack of education opportunities, the lack of jobs for those who have learned in the Santali language. That is one reason why, even though the Santals are very proud of their culture and script and heritage, they prefer to let their children study in English and Hindi medium schools. So there is still a long way to go before the aims and objectives of the Santal tribes are realized. So there ends my presentation. Yes. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to make this presentation. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mukta.
Yes.
So here we come to an end of technical session 12 of the day, and with the end of the day also. I know it has been a long day, but worth waiting, and it must be a fruitful. We all have learned a lot. So I would give a brief feedback from my end to all the presenters. First of all, I congratulate you all. You all have been wonderful, and to know so many new facts, and I got familiar with so many new things. First was Sonia Pillai's presentation, fully explored the bond between tribals and their environments with the movie adaptations, and is this is how we take research to a next level. So I congratulate Sonia. Then second was how Deepa George showed the challenge faced by indigenous students with an eye towards how we might provide more equitable and culturally responsive education within the current context of standardization and accountability. So I congratulate the presenter. Third one was Mr. Digambar, who pointed out very well on the Nepalese ethnic minority, its historical context, and which we hope to make a modest contribution to the understanding, responding to Nepal's diversity through the novels. So, Mr. Digambar, very well done. And then was Magisha. I appreciate how Magisha, introduced us that how Somalis face various problems such as cultural difference, languages barriers, lack of job opportunities, or to settle in host country. And she threw the light on prejudices against Somalis, which is also considered as an obstacle in the process of refugee integration and true concerns for the refugees and their well-being. So I congratulate Magisha. Then the fifth presentation was by Mr. Satyavrata, who focused on how flora and fauna and preserving the ecological balance, which is disrupted constantly through the rapid growth of population. And the last one was cherry on the cake, crisp, brief, very informative by Mukta Satisha. She wonderfully depicted the minority status of the Santali language and discussed about the origin of the Santali language, rising of Pol Chiki, and the evolution of the language. Thank you so much. So I congratulate all the presenters, and I thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to chair the session. Any questions? So the floor is open. I know it might be difficult to do with all these digital resources without paper and books. We all have done it without that. We haven't gone to any libraries and all, but I thank the organizers for giving the opportunity. Thank you so much. Yeah. Any questions? Anybody who would like to ask any question? Sorry, I couldn't turn on my video. Here, there's no electricity, heavy rains, so network is really poor. Yes, Shubhra ma'am, you can take over if there is no question. I think all is clear.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Anshika. Thank you for chairing the session so well and being with us throughout, because I know it is too late today, even though we are late for almost 1.5 hours and everybody has almost left. Thank you so much for chairing the session, ma'am. And congratulations to all the paper presenters. Really very good quality of paper and very insightful things we got today. We had a wonderful day today. Thank you for joining us. And for tomorrow, we will all be connected at 8:30. Room will be open. And around 9 o'clock sharp, we will have Jason Paleotelis from Philippines joining us as a plenary session speaker. So thank you everybody for joining, and have a pleasant night. Thank you. Bye bye.